So hello, everyone. EV Charging at Home, Vetting Your Installation Professional is the webinar topic for today. My name is Maya Carlsfeld, and I'm working here at the Capital Regional District as the e-mobility coordinator. Really excited to be able to offer this webinar today, as well as its recording for any attendees who are interested in learning a little bit more about what to look for when you are trying to just make sure you're getting the right kind of electrician and to install your EV service equipment. So just a quick reminder on some Zoom etiquette. Please remember to stay muted unless you're invited to unmute during the Q&A section. If you do have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, feel free to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. It will pop out a little side menu for you to be able to do that. And we will be monitoring the questions and comments and bringing them up for Neil to answer, most likely at the end of the presentation. It's a bit of a shorter presentation today. We only have about an hour, so we're going to probably speed through things pretty quickly. You are invited to turn on your video if you are comfortable and able to do so. Please keep in mind that the session is being recorded. It's just a nice way to be able to engage a little bit more actively with the webinar if you're interested in it. So a brief agenda for today, similar to yesterday's webinar. Just want to cover a quick welcome to Charge Your Ride and do a territorial acknowledgement for where we are located. And then I'll pass it off to our guest speaker, Neil Normandou at the Electrical Joint Training Committee. We will have time at the end for questions and answer period. So the Charge Your Ride campaign over here at the CRD is partially funded by NRCan at the Federal Government of Canada. And it is a program in which we are doing a lot of public outreach, both for the general public as well as for trades such as electricians and contractors, automotive technicians, etc. Just getting more familiarized with both electric vehicles as well as electric bikes. And putting this up here on the screen, and I'll bring it up again at the end for your information, that there are more online and in-person events planned for Charge Your Ride. So here's a few that are up on the screen. We do have a second session of this webinar coming up in November 15th. So if you know somebody who's interested in maybe attending, there is another opportunity to watch it. Of course, this recording will also be available online in probably a few days to a couple weeks, depending on when it's ready. So that's another way to get this information. We also have another session on electric vehicle infrastructure training program, and this is specifically for electrical contractors. Neil will return with us on November 14th to be able to go into more in depth on this training program that is available through his work. And then the other session at the end there is October 26th. We have an in-person opportunity for automotive technicians at Camosun College to learn more about the EV maintenance training for auto technicians program that they offer there. So that will be on the 26th. And you can find more information about all of these events at crd.bc.ca/charge. And so a quick territorial acknowledgement here. I just want to acknowledge that the CRD conducts its business in Coast Salish and Iqaluit territories, and there's over 20 traditional territories represented within the CRD. I'm calling in from the Victoria area, which is the traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, specifically the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. And I'd like to invite everyone that's on the call today to go ahead and enter in the chat where you might be calling in from today. You can do so by either acknowledging the traditional territory or by letting us know which municipality you're calling in from. And with that, I'll pass it over to Neil.
Thank you very much, Maya. Welcome, everyone. My name is Neil Normandou. I work with the Electrical Joint Training Committee in conjunction with E2 Inc. as our subsidiary. Pretty much today, I will present a little basically bit about our EVITP program, but at the same time, to kind of give you an idea of how to vet your electrician or essentially the contractors, or there's certain things to look for. We will go into a little bit of the context of the program, but to also identify a little bit about what to look for and what the discussions for EV programs are going to be. So just give me one moment and I will begin the presentation right away. Okay, second. All right, so our program is EVITP, so the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program. And the context essentially behind the program, and as well as some of the discussions we're going to have today, do relate to the growing knowledge that greenhouse gases are increasing in Canada. And within basically this period of 1990 to 2017, the emissions grew by 19%. So a significant proportion of this growth is driven by the increase of oil and gas and transportation sector. Transportation-related GHG emissions increases by 43% over that same time period. Now, the deployment of electric vehicles presents an enormous opportunity to address emissions in the transportation sector. So in Canada, over 80% of the country's electricity generation does come from non-emitting sources. So we are aware that there are things such as hydro, which is the one primary source in British Columbia. But there are also viable sources like wind, solar, geothermal, which are becoming more prevalent, and sustainable solutions to contribute to increasing electrical needs. Now, EVs can contribute to Canada's clean growth and climate change strategies. So this is to stimulate best practices in energy efficiency and clean technology, and as well plays a critical role in the broadening landscape of renewable distributed energy, storage technology and research, as well as development and demonstration. Now, as of 2016, Statistics Canada reported that 20% of occupied private dwellings were apartments. Basically, we're talking about people that essentially live either in rentals or full ownership. So low, mid-rise, and as well high-rise buildings, not necessarily including duplexes. But for the census metropolitan area, the number was really high, which is basically 35%. So nationally, installations will reflect a balance of residential, multi-unit residential buildings, as well as commercial properties. But the industry must consider that most, if not all, metropolitan areas have an existing footprint of these buildings. Now, this represents a great opportunity for all of industry, and as well for all who are actually living in those buildings. And we are looking at modernizing the existing infrastructure and advance the electrification of our transport industry. Now, the installation criteria is for a single family dwelling home. If we think about the requirements that is needed just to basically park one or two vehicles, and then you are going to wire one home, the complexity isn't overly great. It's pretty straightforward, but when you are now involving multifamily dwellings, which is a large percentage of metropolitan areas, there's actually quite a few factors to consider. So having to manage working with stratas and customers, there's a massive consultation process, which is to help advise and develop a plan that would best suit the unit owners, and as well to determine the different cost options based on equipment, charging strategies, and as well future considerations. There is even the possibility of engineering, depending again on the complexity and as well as the municipal requirements. There is the selection of equipment that's going to be discussed, documentation, and as well dealing with utilities. Now, the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program, which is a program that was designed to instruct and as well to increase the knowledge base for contractors as well as for electricians, addresses the needs for EV charging infrastructure. So the idea is to not train electricians on how to be electricians. We are trying to teach electricians about the industry of EV charging and how to attain an installation in a safe and also a cost-effective manner for the consumer and as well for the business practice. Now, our program does focus in on installation best practices, our electrical code and jurisdictional requirements, emerging technologies, safety, and as well customer service. Now, for today's purpose, we're not going to go through all of the details of our program. The idea is to understand what we are giving information to the contractors, as well helps you as well make a decision to work with them. Now, during the installation, the intent is to have electricians and contractors understand equipment specifications, which is very, very important. As a consumer, your needs are always going to be evolving, forcing not necessarily just your decision as to what equipment you're going to be using, but as well the equipment manufacturers. Because as a consumer, there's always going to be needs such as faster charging times, simpler using user interface, programmability of the systems, and as well safety, safety, safety. The idea as well is to be able to have expandability for your system, and to also understand the system limitations. And these are discussions that you would have with your contractors. Additionally, is to also understand the equipment standards that are going to be available in North America. And the one basically detail for this is, and you probably already have heard of this, it's like CSA UL. These are all equipment stamps that are required for the retail environment in North America. Then your contractor and electricians also have to deal with all of the electrical codes that basically specifies the installation processes, and as well the pretty much all the nuances required for that installation as well. Now, when we are looking at existing buildings, you are going to be dealing with some of the most significant challenges that are going to come with EV charging installations. Considering that these buildings were built before really the EV changes come around, the electrical system in the building were just not originally going to meet the requirements to expand and go into all these new systems. So parking garages were never designed with EV charging in mind. Then you can look at the parking stalls were not designed to accommodate new facilitated equipment to be able to charge vehicles. But a number of solutions for the market today can help facilitate home charging, and even for residents of older buildings. Now, it is worth noting that each building is going to be unique, and so it will require a tailored EV charging solution that you can have a discussion with your contractor. Now, there are going to be general steps to consider during the planning phase, but differences will exist in the end goal approach. Now, this has been extrapolated from NRCan, so Natural Resources Canada, and to give you a really broad idea as to what the evaluation process will look when you are working with a contractor. And these are the questions. It's not pretty much a plug and play type system. It does actually require quite a bit, especially if you're going to be dealing with municipalities, dealing with incentives that are going to be provided by the government for rebate purposes, and as well making sure you are tailoring the installation for either the immediate or foreseeable future, so such as expandability. So working with condo boards, strata councils, or property managers, or even if it's just going to be for your own personal home, the decision to consider the installation of EV infrastructure occurs once a need arises. So typically that is at the decision of buying an electric vehicle. Now, there also may be the future proofing of your home that would involve that decision, but in considering the doing so, you'd want the ability to be able to charge at home, and as well make sure that you do select a proper workforce to do so that for you. So start off with, we would essentially be initiating a discussion of that installation. So as indicated, when the need arises, there will be a pretty thorough information gathering of what those needs are going to be. So during that idealistic time between the owners or of a single family home, the type of charger you want to looking at, like how much access you want, number and locations of the amount of units you want to install, the budget, the cost allocation, which is really important. The cost can actually keep going up if certain things aren't being met. So if you, for one, don't have enough energy available, then upgrades to the system may have to be included, which will increase the costs. The electrical system considerations for the systems as well, energy management, which is the ability to load share, and I'll talk about that briefly. And as well, understanding the provincial and territorial codes, standards, and regulations, what you have the ability to do, and also making sure that you do meet the technical requirements for that municipality or jurisdiction. And Later on, depending as to if you are part of a strata or board, is to also survey the residents of what their needs are going to be, their interests, and if it would be foreseeable of being a viable option to install EVSEs, and as well outlining the approach to electrical vehicle charging. The following process is as well information gathering, but then the idea would be to seek out a qualified electrical contractor. When it comes to single family homes, there is a bit of provision allowed for homeowners to do installations on their own, depending as well as per the municipality and if they actually meet specific requirements. I will talk a little about like incentives and rebates as to how those are achieved and the eligibility for it. But at the end of the day, it is always advisable, and this is primarily for insurance purposes and as well meeting specific municipality requirements, to seek out an electrical contractor to do the work, as there is a process of doing it efficiently and safely. And the primary asset at the end of the day is going to be, your home, and as well as the lives that are within there as well. During the initial consultation, then all of the questions you had previously during the initial assessment was, going to be answered about how many EV chargers to be installed, the type of EV stations, again, the permitting requirements, as well how to get power to those devices, and basically the cost as well. There may be electrical and architectural plan review requirements depending as to the complexity of the installation, and as well the energy data assessment. So how much energy is going to be required and compared to how much you actually have. So a pretty thorough site evaluation is going to be needed. Now, following that, you are going to be looking at like the options development. And so we're now dealing with the physical, the technical, and then the financial. These again are critical because you kind of have to have an idea of the proximity to your power source, the parking supply, parking layouts and design, as well as connectivity. But then dealing with the technical is understanding, how the EV charging system works. So if you're dealing with a single family dwelling, it's pretty straightforward, but getting into larger buildings for condos, and especially dealing with strata and boards, is now dealing with systems that might have to get networked, and as well making sure that you are formulating this according to a plan that will work for everyone. And then the financial aspect is the installation cost, the operations and maintenance, which is often overlooked. It's great to have a brand new fancy shiny device sitting there available for users, but what about a year to 2 years down the line when the system actually requires maintenance? That these are important considerations as to how much time and effort, and as well finances that will be allocated towards that. And then to determine how to bill for some of these to the users, whether you're going to have the EV systems connect directly to someone's existing infrastructure that it gets billed independently, or if it's part of a strata, then how do you bill for it if it's going to be the time and layouts, and as well the use and demand charges. Additional parts of the information and gathering is going to then be the preparation for the installation. So this is when everything has been negotiated, you've selected the contractor, and following that is then allowing the work to pursue. So then that process is primarily going to be on the contractor's side. They will have to secure the necessary permits, and much to the dismay of actually a lot of individuals and speculation that you don't need permits for installing systems on even existing circuitry. It's actually untrue. All municipalities that require any type of EV modifications or electrical modifications, a permit needs to be extracted from the municipality or through services like Technical Safety BC to make sure that it does conform to all of the necessary standards. Once the installation has been complete, then a final inspection will be required, and as well the necessary testing to make sure that everything does work according to plan. Now, The project wrap up, I usually identify it as being the handover to the consumer. And at that point, it's not really the end of that particular process. Trying to identify with either a contractor or essentially just doing it on a one time a year is to deal with the maintenance of these systems. There are statistics out there that identify like the one biggest downfall to having EV infrastructure is when a car driver goes to a charging site and the system is down. What essentially is the case for it is that the whether it is privately owned or part of a retail network, is simply that the unit is not operational because the lack of maintenance to the system. There are mechanical aspects in the unit because of safety factors. There's contactors. The cord itself is handled by the consumer, and it can be driven over it. There may be damage to the copper and to the conductors, or they can simply just be stolen because they are commodities that are actually in the middle of public spaces. So the last thing you want as a consumer is to go to these properties and the systems are not operational because of small deficiencies. This is why maintenance programs are really, really critical and have to be budgeted within the finances. Now, just to get a bit of an idea as to what contractors have to go through and to get a bit of an understanding as to as well for the safety of either your home or your facilities, is to understand a little about the jurisdictional requirements for the systems. Now, electricians and contractors in Canada have to work with a code. And this is basically all the installation regulation is required for the installation of electrical devices and pretty much for their operations. So the requirements for this is actually pretty much a national item. And then all of a sudden you got to look at the jurisdictional requirements, which actually may supersede the rule that is within that code book. So our Canadian Electrical Code is a template, and there are going to be some differences between certain jurisdictions, such as looking at provincial and territorial areas. But the municipality that you do live in may have specific requirements for that installation. So it may seem straightforward, but then there are going to be some additional steps to go through. This may just basically be because you live in an area that may be seismically active, such as we are in British Columbia. So there are going to be specific regulations to that high amount of rain or snow, or just anything else that may require some changes. But there is also going to be some additional regulations in terms of emerging technologies. So how big your circuit's going to be, if there is going to be a requirement for energy management and how to actually work with that. But, as an example, if we look at the city of Burnaby compared to Vancouver, there are going to be some nuances that will make the installation different, and you have to basically meet them for the requirements of these specifications. So for those of you who don't know, British Columbia does have 9 jurisdictions for pretty much the electrical component to the province. And one of the bigger ones is going to be Technical Safety BC. So if you ever have any questions that you can just either speak with your municipality, or you might get directed to Technical Safety BC for any of those electrical needs. Now, most non-metropolitan areas don't have any special requirements. As an example, the city of Kelowna, the last I checked, didn't have any special requirements for that jurisdiction, and everything was then pertaining to the regulations that are found in the Canadian Electrical Code. But looking at all of the other lower mainland cities, then they are going to have specially outlined details in technical bulletins that your contractor needs to know and understand. This is going to basically be the means of having your installation approved versus having to get it remodified again. And it's a matter of making sure that you're dealing with cost savings, so you don't have to have an installation continue to be to get fixed and to also get changed because they don't meet the requirements. Now, for the sake of your installation, this is where a good understanding of some of the new technologies that are out there. Now, EVs have been out there for at least a minimum at least a decade, if not 2 decades out, and available to consumers. But the one thing that has been constantly evolving is the charging technology. We're always going to be needing faster, basically more sharing options, and as well having a vaster network of systems that will meet the demands. So that infrastructure, especially like in the Lower Mainland or the majority of municipalities, have special requirements when it does come to EV management. So if we were to look at an existing building or even an existing single-family dwelling, the electrical infrastructure may have limitations. So that limitation being that when your home or your building were originally put into place, the planning for it, the EV charging equipment was never taken into consideration. So that was basically built to spec with what is currently there. Now, increasing that load, meaning that you're going to be installing new devices, and according to our electrical regulations, that EV charging equipment actually has a pretty large footprint on that load calculation. So the infrastructure you have in your home may or may not meet those needs, but it's not to say that you would have to make a massive change, because emerging technologies means that you can now do things such as load sharing. There's priority use protocols, sequential rotation that will not have to make any differences to your load requirements. So understanding the hardware is critical for your installer, and as well the requirements for the consumer's needs, so for yourself. So EV charging systems have the ability to be interconnected for the purpose of energy management. So this way you can install multiple systems on a single circuit, or you can have technology that will cut out your EV charging in case you are exceeding the capacities to your system. So it is pretty much a balancing system. Now, the system specifications will have a pretty good influence on the sizing of your circuit, because at the end of the day, it's all about the protection of your existing infrastructure. So this way you don't max it out and you don't stress it to the capacity that it will go into a failure mode. The electrical equipment in Canada have a certain standard that it has to be met. So CSA is pretty much a relatively common, basically a common standard that we're actually all aware of. Then there basically is regulations you would find in our electrical code. You can deal with Technical Safety BC for all of those answers, and as well as dealing with your municipalities as well. So considering that the equipment has to meet certain standards as well as your installation, one thing as a consumer that you need to know is that it's not a one-size-fits-all for equipment. Your installer should notice as well, by principle, that your installer needs to make sure that the equipment meets the needs for the user and as well to meet the needs for the standards. And this kind of falls into place regarding the retail industry. Canadian retailers, when you go to hardware store, when you go to an electrical con or a wholesaler, they're mandated to stock equipment that is regulated under strict standards. Now, the consumer market has changed a lot. So when we look at the landscape of what consumers have access to today, such as retail services, that goes beyond the local shelves of your stores, the hardware stores, the Home Depots, and the wholesalers you find at the corners. If you start doing the process of ordering online, so big places like Amazon, eBay, Wayfair, all that kind of stuff, can pose a bit of a risk to the standards because those shelves don't technically exist on Canadian soil. It has been noted and as well as identified that equipment can be brought into Canada that don't meet the standards, after you've ordered it. Just because they are not stocked in Canada means that that doesn't necessarily mean it cannot be brought into Canada. The problem with it is that they don't have the CSA or UL standards because there might be something at issue with it that don't necessarily meet our needs. So proper grounding, possibly it could be a protocol, or essentially just the equipment itself is not designed for the installation or for the purpose that you're wanting it for. So it's a pretty big loophole. And when ordered and then requesting for someone to install it for you might seem like a good cost-saving tactic, but at the end, it could have pretty grave implications as, causing fires. It could be damaging to property or essentially to lives as well. So it's pretty much a user beware that you can't just assume that purchasing something will meet all the standards. Basically, your installer needs to also see that they are met, and again, by ethics, that they're supposed to refuse the installation or to say find a way to conform the equipment to the standards that we have today. Now, one of the last segments to consider, basically providing services to residential as well to multifamily systems, is with an end product that's going to meet your needs. This requires for the installer to understand all of the intricacies of working with utilities, your municipal authorities, the customers themselves, and as well potentially dealing with strata corporation. There is a requirement for the installer to understand what products are going to be available for the customer and the needs and the available services for management and maintenance of that infrastructure. Furthermore, because there's a lot of incentives and rebates, it's also to understand how to produce an EV ready plan. And this is one of those things that is going to be required for you to take advantage of the rebates through BC Hydro and as well provincial or federal grants that are going to be available for larger installations. Now, when we are going to be looking for contractors or electricians, big things that you need to consider is their certification process. The provincial requirements for British Columbia is that you do need a Red Seal certificate to operate as not just an electrician, but as a contractor. And then there is further certification required for municipal purposes, such as licenses, your field certification, which is the FSR certification, and as well the bonds and so forth. But basically, the province and Red Seal certifications require that you basically have these in presence to be able to pull permits, which is actually an important part of the installation. Now, to be eligible for a single-family home charging rebate, this is again not part of the multifamily systems. To be able to take advantage of the rebates for labor and construction costs, that the installation needs to be done by a licensed electrician. Then as well, the permit needs to be pulled by that electrician to be able to qualify to that grant and rebate. Now, the process for multifamily dwellings is a little different, but similar to how it is for residential homes. There is no getting around, the installation of EV charging equipment of having it done by an electrical contractor, because that is the provincial requirement for anything that is beyond the single-family dwelling. The reason why I'm saying that is because you might have heard of your neighbor having done an installation and they did it on their own and they still managed to get all of the rebates. And that's because the municipality that you live in allows for individuals to do their own work. So homeowners can do electrical work, but the premise to it is that you are going to be responsible for still pulling that electrical permit. They still need an inspection done, and that eligibility requires for you to still show proof of payment for the charger, there's proof of payment for the inspection invoice, and as well that you have a certificate of inspection to make sure that it was looked at by the necessary bodies. So that is only applicable to single family homes. So if you don't have any inclination to have an electrician do it, just make sure that you understand what your municipality is going to be requiring. But My word of advice, because of all the minor intricacies required for the installation and as well understanding the systems, consult and as well look into a local electrician and contractor to do the work, because again, you are dealing with safety, and proper installations to the electrical systems can be somewhat complex, especially if you're having to do load calculations for your home. Now, in conclusion to this presentation is just as well to get an idea that a large proportion of charging currently occurs at home, which ensures that all Canadians have access where they live, and it's going to be key to facilitating widespread EV adoption. Recognizing the importance of addressing some of the most critical barriers associated with charging is therefore integral to further uptake. So the installation of your EV infrastructure in multifamily complexes or as well as your own home is unquestionably important given the commitment to the continued deployment of EVs across the country. So a greater understanding of the installation process is key for all those who are involved. Not just a contractor or an electrician, but it's going to be for the owners, for those who are in councils or stratas, but it's basically anyone who is involved in the installation process. Now, our position in the industry is to support those who are involved with the installation of electric vehicle charging equipment. We do provide an industry-leading program which supports electricians, contractors with the knowledge that is necessary to supply and successfully support the customer. Working with CRD, actually, they will basically be able to provide you more information about our program, but I'd be open to questions at the very end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil, for going through the presentation. Lots of good information there. And as I mentioned before at the beginning, we will be making sure to provide this recording to registrants and for folks who may be interested after the fact to give a review of the information. And yeah, I'd like to open up the opportunity for our attendees to perhaps ask some questions. If there's any questions, you can pop them in the comments or feel free to unmute yourself and ask verbally. I will also go ahead and share my screen one more time to show the dates for, oops, where's my mouse? I've lost my mouse. There we go. Okay, well, it's not working for me, so. That's weird. There we go. Okay, so up on the screen, you should be able to see the upcoming events one more time, and you can find lots of information about the topics spoken about today, as well as others on e-mobility of various kinds at crd.bc.ca/charge, as well as if you have any questions, either for myself or for Neil, we'll make sure to provide our contact information and follow-up emails to registrants. Okay. And if there are no questions from attendees, then I think we'll go ahead and call it there. Thank you so much, Neil, for your time today. I really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you again at the upcoming webinars.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. Thank you. All right.